Hello, and welcome to Stat Wars, a Star Wars Legion podcast focused on competitive results. The date is May 19th, 2025. All results we will be reviewing come from Longshanks after filtering for rated singles events. So let's take a look at our recent results. We had 7 one-day events and 2 two-day events over the past weekend with a total of 87 players. So a fairly small player count, but a couple of interesting events to look at. Our first event comes out of France, which the event translates to A New Hope. I will do the courtesy to the French of not trying to pronounce it myself. It only had 10 players, but 5 wins is 5 wins, so congratulations to Charles John. If we look at the results, we can see that the Grand Army of the Republic did very well, even though there were only 2 players present, and all the other factions did fairly consistent with how they're performing in the general meta. Taking a moment to look at the winning list, what we see is that it is the exact list that we saw Isaiah run at Worlds at Adepticon about a month ago and have a lot of success with. So really exciting to see that that list is holding up in the hands of other players. I think it's a great tool for the Grand Army of the Republic. Moving on to our next event, it was held in Australia and called BrisCon. It consisted of 20 players, won by Rex Savage running a CIS list. That's our first 5-0 CIS player since the April update. If we look at the overall performance, we see that CIS, GAR, and Rebels all did fairly equally during the event, with only Empire struggling. Looking at the winning list, it is a pretty fun one. It has Kalani as the commander, includes both Asajj and Maul with Saber Throw, Burst of Speed, and Into the Fray. A chain of B-1 battle droids, the Sith probe droids from Maul, the AAT battle tank with armor-piercing shells, high-energy cells, and the Ohm series droid pilot to keep the coordinate chain going, and 1 heavy Aqua droid squad. Presumably, Rex was having Asajj and Maul peekaboo out from behind the Aqua droids, while the AAT was there to deal with all the various dodge heavy units and armor heavy units that are currently in the game. Next, I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about Invader League. But before I talk about Invader League, I wanted to take a moment to explain what it is. It is an online Legion League. Players initially participate in pods. The top players from those pods then advance to an elimination round. So we're currently still in the pod phase, which will wrap up in early June. And it is generally considered to be a more competitive league, so it helps provide sort of a canary in the coal mine for looking at how different factions are stacking up against one another, interesting tactics that are developing, etc. So really fun to look at some of the data for that. And here are the current results. As we can see, CIS is ahead at 57%, Rebels at 53%, Empire at 47%, and GAR at 44%. These all largely line up with what we're seeing in the larger data set, which we'll look at in a few moments. The other interesting thing is we can look at some of the objective play and advantages and other factors that are happening in this league. So one thing we can see is that 3 of the objectives, Bunker Assault, Close the Pocket, and Recover the Research, are quite popular, while the other 3, Breakthrough, Intercept, and Shifting Priorities, are less popular. Presumably that is a result of those objectives being able to be more skewed by one army or another, so that people tend to ban them out more. Looking at the secondaries, we see that Recon, Surface Scan, and Sweep and Clear are again the 3 most popular, while Bring Them to Heal, Destroy Enemy Base, and Mark Targets are less popular. I think a similar logic applies here, especially for Bring Them to Heal and Destroy Enemy Base, where certain units can be very powerful on those secondary objectives, and people don't want to risk having the game tilt out of control very quickly. Moving on to the advantages, we can see that most of the advantages are actually pretty close in terms of performance and affecting win state. So we see Advanced Intel, which used to be considered the strongest advantage, being helpful but not a game determinant effect at 54%. Cunning and Deployment, clearly the most common. It's sort of the default, I'm okay with you having it, you're okay with me having it, advantage, and having a slight benefit to win rate. Ordnance is the third most popular, but given that you can harm yourself as much as the other player with Ordnance, it's seeing a less than 50% win rate. Maybe something that needs to be tweaked there to make it more user-friendly, or just more time for people to learn how to use it better. The final interesting stat is the blue player, red player split. As of right now, it doesn't matter. There's this belief that being blue player is a significant disadvantage. As of right now, it's not. Presumably, some red players are stealing blue, so maybe there's a slight advantage to being red player, but it's not bearing out to be a significant effect on the data set. Moving on to our larger macro statistics, here's our current global win rates. We can see that CIS is largely holding steady at about 58% win rate, Rebels at a 55% win rate, Republic at a 48% win rate, and Empire, unfortunately, at a 38% win rate. We're now just around 500 games per faction, so roughly half of all of our other data sets. I expect smaller and smaller movement as we continue to grow in the number of games, so I wouldn't expect big shifts in this data, but we'll continue to monitor and see what happens. Next, we want to look at our faction popularity. The good news is that everybody's fairly equal in popularity. Empire is down. They were at 25% last week. This week, now they're down to 23%. I don't think it's meaningful given the small number of data sets we're looking at, and I could see that easily bouncing up to 25% depending on lists that people take next week. Next, we're looking at the X&O, X&1 percentage of players that are winning events or placing well at events, and we can see here that both Rebels and CIS are at a roughly 25% win rate, where Republic and Empire are at roughly half of that. What this means for the average player is that you're roughly twice as likely to place at a top table using a CIS or Rebel list compared to an Empire or GAR list. Next, we have our 5-0 or better finishes. Here we can see that we now have at least one for every faction, so that is exciting. And I think everyone except for Rebels have equaled their last data set of performance. The February to April data set didn't have a large number of major events. Unless we see some sort of emergency patch come into the game, I expect that this data set will run until the November timeframe, so I expect those numbers to rise significantly for all the factions. Finally, we're looking at our week-to-week performance or growth over time, and here we can see that CIS dropped a little bit since our last update, but not significantly. GAR went down and came back up a little bit, so no big changes there, and Empire's just kind of holding steady at the bottom, unfortunately. So, just some concluding remarks. We have a growing data set. It looks pretty similar to the previous iteration before the April update. That's not terribly surprising given that there weren't a large number of points changes in that update. We'll see going forward if that something happens to upset it, but as of right now, I would expect that largely status quo to hold. The exciting news is that we have 3 large events next week. We have the World Team Championships in the UK, Rocky Top on the East Coast, and Kubla on the West Coast of the United States. So we should have some more fun events to look at. With that, thank you for watching, and if you made it this far, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you.